Hey guys, tonight we begin with something soft and slow. No battles. No dramatic trumpet blasts. Just the gentle slosh of mud under boots and the distant murmur of a market that never quite smells as good as it sounds. So dim the lights. Set your phone down somewhere safe. Let your shoulders relax. And imagine we're strolling together through narrow medieval streets, where the buildings lean inward like gossiping neighbors, and the road beneath you is less road and more ambitious dirt. We're not here for glory. We're here for texture, for crooked timber frames, for open drains, for kings who insisted they ruled by divine right, but could not rule their own digestion. It's cozy in its own way, slightly damp, slightly tragic, completely human. Picture a city in late medieval Europe. Let's say somewhere in the orbit of Paris or London. Not the polished postcard versions. The earlier editions. The ones where the streets were narrow because nobody expected carts to get that wide, and where urban planning meant build wherever it fits and hope the wall holds. The roads are mud for most of the year. In summer, it's dust. In winter, it's a swamp with ambitions. In spring, it's both. And yet, people live here. Thousands of them. They wake up in cramped wooden houses with thatched or tiled roofs, hoping the bakery down the lane hasn't raised prices again. Because inflation is not a modern invention. It's just more politely graphed now. Open markets hum at the center of it all. You can hear them before you see them. The soft shuffle of livestock. The creak of wooden carts. The patient sigh of someone who has been arguing about the price of onions since dawn. Vendors shout, but not too dramatically. It's less epic speech and more tired insistence. Fish laid out on tables. Bread stacked in uneven towers. Herbs bundled in little green knots that promise health and mostly deliver flavor. And somewhere beyond these markets, beyond the mud and the merchant stalls, stands a palace. Or perhaps a fortified manor. Inside it lives someone very important. Someone who probably hasn't walked through the mud in years. Someone whose jawline may or may not have been compromised by generations of strategic cousin marriages. Let's gently wander toward one of our favorite examples of dynastic determination gone slightly sideways, the Habsburgs. Now, if you've ever seen portraits of Charles II of Spain, you may have noticed something distinctive. A certain jaw. A commitment to chin architecture. Charles II, bless him, was the final Habsburg ruler of Spain. He was also the living embodiment of what happens when family trees become family ladders. Charles was born in 1661. By that point, the Habsburgs had been carefully marrying within a very exclusive dating pool for generations. Because alliances were important. Territories were important. And apparently, genetic variety was optional. His parents were uncle and niece. Which was not unusual for them. Of course it wasn't. As a child, Charles was frail. Very frail. He didn't walk until he was around 4. He struggled to speak clearly. He had chronic illnesses that left him exhausted and often bedridden. His jaw was so pronounced that it made chewing difficult. Portrait painters did their best. They always do. But even they could not entirely disguise the sense that nature had been asked to work under very specific, very limiting instructions. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, in those narrow streets were still quietly strolling through. Ordinary people were selling cabbage and arguing about cloth measurements. They were living in crowded homes with dirt floors. They were navigating open sewers. And their king, miles away, was navigating his own digestive challenges and dynastic expectations. Charles II married twice. First to Marie Louise of Orleans, and later to Maria Anna of Newburgh. Neither marriage produced children, which was, for a dynasty built on continuation, a bit of a problem. The Spanish Empire at that time was vast. It stretched across continents. And its ruler could barely eat solid food without difficulty. Let's just sit with that irony for a moment. Outside, bustling markets, narrow alleys, regular life. Inside, elaborate tapestries, gilded chairs, and a monarch whose body was quietly rebelling against centuries of strategic matchmaking. And Charles was not alone in this tradition of royal fragility. Let's drift slightly north and a little earlier in time to Henry VI of England. Henry VI was born in 1421 and became king as an infant. Which is already a lot to ask of a baby. He inherited the thrones of England and, at least nominally, parts of France. A tiny human in elaborate robes, probably more interested in teething than taxation policy. Henry grew into a gentle, deeply pious man. Soft-spoken. Kind. Not particularly suited to the sharp elbows of medieval politics. He founded educational institutions like Eton College and King's College, Cambridge. He preferred prayer and scholarship to warfare. Which might sound lovely. And it is, in a way. But his reign was marked by political instability and eventually the Wars of the Roses. Henry experienced periods of mental illness. Long stretches where he seemed detached from reality. At one point, after hearing of a military defeat, he reportedly became unresponsive for over a year. A king in body. Absent in spirit. While the narrow streets of London carried on, markets buzzing, apprentices sweeping shop fronts, the smell of tanned leather drifting lazily through the air, the king was lost in his own mind. Governance fell to ambitious nobles. Because of course it did. Let's float over to another royal disaster. This time, we'll visit Juana I of Castile, often called Joanna the Mad. A nickname that history handed her with a slightly smug shrug. Juana was born in 1479, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. Yes, those Ferdinands and Isabellas. She married Philip the Handsome, officially Philip I of Castile, who was indeed considered handsome. Though if you look at enough Habsburg portraits, you start to suspect the definition was flexible. Juana reportedly loved Philip intensely. Passionately. Perhaps obsessively. When he died in 1506, she was devastated. Some accounts claim she traveled with his coffin, refusing to be separated from his body. Now, historians debate how much of this story was exaggerated by political rivals. Because a grieving woman with power is inconvenient. And labeling her unstable is efficient. She was eventually confined, ruling in name but not in practice. For decades. Meanwhile, outside her confinement, in towns with narrow lanes and market squares, life continued. Farmers brought in grain. Bakers rose before dawn. Children chased each other past stone wells. The rhythm of ordinary existence, steady and unremarkable, in contrast to the elaborate emotional implosions of royalty. There's something oddly calming about that contrast. The markets don't care about dynastic drama. Bread still needs baking. Shoes still need mending. Let's linger in those streets a bit longer. The medieval market was not charming in the sanitized way we imagine. It was loud. It was messy. Animals wandered through. Chickens flapped indignantly. Pigs occasionally made executive decisions about direction. Smells layered themselves in complicated ways. Spices. Sweat. Smoke. The faint suggestion of sewage. And yet, it was the heartbeat of the city. Guilds regulated trade. Bakers had standards to meet. Butchers had specific days. Cloth merchants displayed fabrics like colorful promises. Coins clinked. Deals were struck. Arguments flared and fizzled. In the distance, a church bell rings. Because time, in medieval cities, was often measured in bells. Not notifications. Just the steady toll marking hours that drifted past like slow clouds. And somewhere in a palace chamber, a monarch with an impressive chin or a fragile psyche contemplates destiny. Or perhaps just dinner. The contrast between elite fragility and common resilience is one of history's quiet ironies. Kings and queens lived surrounded by luxury and anxiety. Ordinary townspeople lived surrounded by mud and practicality. Let's gently close our eyes for a second and imagine walking down one of those narrow streets at dusk. The market is winding down. Vendors pack up unsold goods. The sky turns a soft, smoky blue. Windows glow faintly with candlelight. A cartwheel creaks. Someone laughs softly behind a wooden door. History often focuses on crowns and bloodlines. On who married whom. On which jawline became increasingly geometric over time. But most people lived here, in these streets. Buying onions. Repairing boots. Trying not to step directly into anything too suspicious. And tomorrow night, we'll keep wandering. We'll meet more royals with questionable family trees. More queens with complicated reputations. More kings who probably should have taken a nap instead of declaring policy. For now, just breathe in the imagined scent of bread and wood smoke. Let the mud road stretch quietly behind you. Let the open markets fade into a gentle murmur. Because in the end, history is not just palaces and portraits. It's narrow streets. Mud roads. Open markets. And a long, slow story that never quite hurries. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something soft and ordinary. No battlefield speeches. No dramatic assassinations. Just the gentle echo of church bells drifting over rooftops, and the low hum of street vendors arguing about cabbage prices. So dim the lights. Get comfortable. Maybe let your phone rest face down. Tonight, we're wandering through the background noise of history. The bells, the footsteps, the murmuring crowds. And somewhere behind all of that, a royal family quietly unraveling in silk and lace. Imagine a European town in the late medieval period. Dawn has barely stretched across the sky. The streets are narrow. The houses lean toward one another like they're sharing secrets. The ground beneath your feet is uneven. Mud in the winter. Dust in the summer. Something ambiguous in between. And above it all, a church bell rings. Not dramatically. Just insistently. Because time, in this world, is measured in bells. The bell belongs to a cathedral. Perhaps something like Notre Dame de Paris or maybe Westminster Abbey. Massive, stone, patient. These buildings have seen kings crowned and queens buried. They have also seen pigeons doing what pigeons do. History is layered like that. The bell rings again. Vendors begin setting up their stalls. Wooden tables unfold with a tired creak. Baskets of onions. Loaves of bread. Fish that were far fresher a few hours ago. A butcher arranges cuts of meat with a seriousness that suggests this is very important work. Because it is. Daily life depends on this choreography. And above this everyday rhythm, somewhere behind high walls, a monarch wakes up on embroidered sheets. Possibly confused. Possibly ill. Possibly the product of generations of carefully arranged family weddings that prioritized land over genetics. Because of course they did. Let's begin gently with one of the most famous examples of dynastic determination gone slightly wrong, Charles II of Spain. Charles was born in 1661 into the Spanish branch of the Habsburg dynasty. By this point, the family tree was less of a tree and more of a decorative wreath. Intermarriage had been the strategy for keeping power consolidated. Cousins married cousins. Uncles married nieces. Because why diversify when you can double down? Charles's parents were uncle and niece. This was not considered especially shocking in his family. It was more of a scheduling detail. From childhood, Charles was frail. He struggled to walk. He struggled to chew. He struggled to speak clearly. His jaw, famously pronounced, made eating a complicated affair. Court physicians hovered constantly, offering treatments that ranged from hopeful to deeply unhelpful. He was often ill. Frequently exhausted. And yet, he was king. Outside the palace, church bells rang just the same. Bakers kneaded dough. Blacksmiths hammered away. Life did not pause for royal digestion issues. Charles married twice. First to Marie-Louise of Orleans. Then to Maria Anna of Newburgh. Both marriages were politically strategic. Both were watched anxiously by a court desperate for an heir. No children came. The Spanish Empire stretched across continents, and its ruler could barely manage his own health. There is something quietly tragic about that. Also quietly ironic. Let's float over to England. The bells are ringing there too. Vendors shout in markets near the River Thames. Apprentices sweep shop fronts. And in a palace not far from Westminster Palace, a young king named Henry VI of England grows up surrounded by expectation. Henry became king as a baby in 1422. A literal infant in ceremonial robes. Because his father, the energetic and warlike Henry V, had died young. And so the crown rested on the soft head of a child who would much rather pray quietly than command armies. Henry VI was gentle, deeply religious, studious. He founded institutions like Eton College and King's College, Cambridge. He valued education and piety. Which sounds lovely. It truly does. Unfortunately, medieval politics did not run on loveliness. As he matured, Henry experienced periods of profound mental instability. At one point, he became unresponsive for over a year. Completely withdrawn. The king, physically present, but emotionally absent. Governance slipped into the hands of ambitious nobles. Because when the crown hesitates, someone else usually steps forward. Meanwhile, outside, London streets remained loud and practical. Street vendors argued over ale prices. Children ran errands. Church bells marked the hours without commentary. Ordinary life continued at a steady pace while royal life flickered uncertainly. Let's drift south again. The air is warmer now. The bells ring differently. In Castile, we meet Juana I of Castile. Juana was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. Yes, those Ferdinand and Isabella. The ones associated with voyages and empires and very firm religious policies. Juana married Philip I of Castile, who was known as Philip the Handsome. Which was convenient branding. Their marriage was passionate. Accounts describe Juana as deeply attached to Philip. Intensely so. When Philip died in 1506, she was devastated. Some chronicles claim she refused to be separated from his coffin for extended periods. Whether exaggerated or not, her grief became politically useful to others. She was declared unstable. Confined. Controlled. And outside her confinement, the markets hummed. Bakers rose before dawn. Tailors stitched sleeves. Bells rang with calm indifference. The world did not stop for royal sorrow. It's a strange contrast. The elite live in vast halls, surrounded by tapestries and ceremony, yet their emotional lives often seem narrower than the streets below. Ordinary townspeople face mud, illness, and hardship. But their routines are steady. Predictable. Grounded. Let's gently wander through another royal household. This time in France. We'll step into the gilded yet emotionally complicated life of Louis XIII of France. Louis XIII became king as a child after the assassination of his father. He was shy. Reserved. Often overshadowed by powerful figures like Cardinal Richelieu. Louis preferred hunting and music to the exhausting business of political intrigue. He married Anne of Austria. Their relationship was distant for many years. Court gossip filled the silence. The pressure to produce an heir hovered constantly. Because for royalty, reproduction was not personal. It was geopolitical. Eventually, after more than 2 decades of marriage, they produced a son. The future Louis XIV of France. And yes, we will get to him. Because of course we will. But before the Sun King bathed in glory, he was a sickly child in a palace that still smelled faintly of anxiety. Church bells continued ringing outside Parisian markets. Vendors sold cheese and wine. Citizens debated taxes. Inside the Louvre, courtiers whispered about alliances and heirs. The contrast hums softly through history. Let's pause for a moment and listen. A bell tolls the hour. A woman haggles over fabric. A dog barks somewhere in an alley. A monk crosses a square quietly. Life is layered and steady. And in palace corridors, behind heavy curtains, dynasties attempt to outmaneuver mortality with strategic marriages that sometimes produce fragile children with complicated jawlines. It would be easy to imagine royalty as perpetually grand. But so often, they are anxious, sickly, lonely, surrounded by ceremony and yet oddly isolated. Their lives unfold in ornate rooms, but their struggles are deeply human. Insecurity, illness, grief, fear of irrelevance. Meanwhile, the street vendors continue calling out prices. The bells continue marking time. The city breathes in and out. And as we wander slowly through this soundscape of daily noise, we begin to notice something comforting. History is not only crowns and crises. It is repetition. It is routine. It is bread being baked again tomorrow. So let your mind settle into that rhythm. Church bells. Footsteps. Distant chatter. A monarch staring at a ceiling painted with saints, wondering if his dynasty will survive another generation. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something wonderfully unglamorous. No glittering coronations. No heroic speeches. Just the soft, persistent reality of medieval waste management. Or, more accurately, the enthusiastic lack of it. So dim the lights. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe imagine you're wrapped in a blanket that absolutely does not smell like a 14th century alleyway. Because tonight, we're wandering through the quieter, slightly grimier side of history. The side filled with chamber pots, questionable water sources, and royals who ruled continents but could not escape a bad stomach. Take a slow breath and picture a European city around the 1400s. The streets are narrow. The buildings lean toward each other like they're sharing gossip about last week's scandal. And somewhere above, a window opens. A voice calls out a polite warning. And then, well, gravity handles the rest. Waste, in medieval cities, was not discreet. It was visible. Audible. Occasionally airborne. Chamber pots were emptied into the streets. Gutters ran with a mixture of rainwater, scraps, and things best left unnamed. Pigs wandered freely, acting as four-legged sanitation workers with very low standards. It was not ideal. But it was normal. Now, while common people navigated this fragrant maze daily, the elites had their own complicated relationship with hygiene. Castles had garderobes, which were essentially stone toilet closets built into the walls. Waste dropped into pits or moats below. Practical, in theory. Aromatic, in practice. And yet, despite silk gowns and golden crowns, royalty was just as vulnerable to disease as the cobbler down the lane. Perhaps more so. Because when your family tree looks like a decorative wreath, immunity can get creative. Let's gently drift to the Spanish court again and revisit our familiar, fragile monarch, Charles II of Spain. Poor Charles. He is almost too perfect for this theme. Born in 1661, Charles inherited not just an empire but a collection of genetic complications. The Habsburg strategy of marrying within the family had been pursued with admirable consistency. Cousins married cousins. Uncles married nieces. Because why not keep the bloodline pure and the medical mysteries interesting? Charles suffered from chronic illnesses throughout his life. He had digestive problems, respiratory issues, frequent infections. He was described as weak and often bedridden. Some reports suggest he was unable to chew properly due to his famous jaw. Imagine ruling Spain, the Americas, vast territories, and struggling with soup. Court physicians tried everything. Herbal remedies, rituals, prayers, possibly some deeply questionable medical advice involving leeches. Because medieval and early modern medicine loved a good leech. Outside the palace walls, in Madrid streets, waste flowed through gutters. People lived closely packed together. Disease spread easily. Typhus, dysentery, smallpox. Invisible dangers floated quietly through crowded neighborhoods. And inside the palace, despite better food and grander surroundings, the king remained frail. The illusion of control is strong in royalty. But bacteria do not care about divine right. Let's float gently over to France. Specifically, to the glittering court of Louis XIV of France. Ah yes. The Sun King. Radiant. Majestic. Fond of elaborate wigs and very high heels. Louis XIV ruled for over 70 years. He built the Palace of Versailles into a monument of grandeur. Gilded halls. Endless mirrors. Manicured gardens. It was the ultimate flex. But here's the softer, less shiny detail. Versailles, for all its splendor, had limited bathroom facilities. Courtiers sometimes relieved themselves behind tapestries or in stairwells. Because plumbing had not yet caught up with ambition. Louis himself underwent multiple medical procedures during his lifetime. He suffered from painful dental issues. At one point, several of his teeth were extracted in a rather aggressive manner, leaving him with ongoing discomfort. He also endured a famously uncomfortable surgery for an anal fistula. Court surgeons performed it with great seriousness. The entire court held its breath. And when he survived, they composed songs about it. History is strange like that. Despite his image of strength and radiance, Louis battled illness regularly. He experienced fevers, infections, and the general physical wear and tear of existing in a time when germs were still a mysterious rumor. Meanwhile, outside Versailles, Paris continued to wrestle with overcrowding and sanitation challenges. Waste disposal remained inconsistent. Water sources were easily contaminated. Epidemics moved through cities with quiet efficiency. Let's drift slightly eastward and meet Ivan V of Russia. Ivan V ruled jointly with his half-brother, Peter the Great. But unlike his energetic sibling, Ivan struggled with health issues from an early age. He was physically weak, partially blind, possibly cognitively impaired. His family's dynastic marriages had again kept the gene pool somewhat exclusive. While Peter busied himself modernizing Russia, Ivan remained a quieter, more fragile presence. He suffered from chronic illnesses. Court life swirled around him, but he rarely took center stage. In a way, he was both emperor and bystander. Outside the Kremlin walls, Moscow faced its own sanitation problems. Fires broke out frequently. Streets were crowded. Waste accumulated. Disease followed familiar patterns. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way, to realize that while kings debated succession and expansion, ordinary people were just trying to avoid contaminated water. Let's gently step back into medieval England for a moment. The Black Death, that infamous visitor of the 14th century, swept through towns and villages with devastating impact. We won't linger on horror. Just acknowledge the quiet reality. Cities with narrow streets and poor sanitation became ideal pathways for disease. Fleas, rats, human proximity. It was a system that unintentionally collaborated. Even royalty was not immune. Edward III of England lost several children during plague outbreaks. Wealth provided comfort. It did not provide guaranteed safety. The unseen dangers of disease hovered over everyone. There were no microscopes yet to explain it. No germ theory. Just patterns. Fear. And prayer. And yet, daily life continued. Bakers baked. Monks copied manuscripts. Children played in alleys that modern health inspectors would immediately condemn. Bells rang for mass. Markets opened at dawn. Let's float over to another royal household touched by illness and fragility. Mary I of England. Mary Tudor ruled England from 1553 to 1558. She desperately wanted to secure the Catholic succession and produce an heir. She married Philip of Spain. And twice, she believed herself to be pregnant. Her body seemed to show signs. Her belly reportedly swelled. Preparations were made. Anticipation filled the court. But no child came. Historians debate whether these were phantom pregnancies or medical conditions that mimicked them. Either way, the emotional toll must have been immense. Imagine being queen, with the entire political future of your realm tied to your womb. And your body simply does not cooperate. Meanwhile, London sanitation remained patchy. Disease lingered in crowded districts. Life expectancy was modest. And the Queen's private disappointment unfolded quietly behind palace walls. Waste and disease are not glamorous topics. But they shape history profoundly. They influence succession. They alter dynasties. They determine which royal children survive and which do not. And so, as we continue our slow walk through these dimly lit corridors of the past, notice the gentle irony. Kings build palaces with hundreds of rooms. Yet they cannot guarantee clean water. Queens wear jewels worth fortunes. Yet they cannot command their own biology. Empires stretch across continents. Yet a microscopic organism can quietly redraw the map. Let your breathing slow with that thought. The past was grand. It was tragic. It was also deeply human. Somewhere in a medieval alley, a bucket tips. Somewhere in a palace chamber, a physician sighs thoughtfully over a royal pulse. And the bells continue to ring, indifferent to it all. Tomorrow, we'll wander further into dynastic oddities. More fragile airs. More well-dressed anxiety. More unseen dangers drifting gently through history's narrow streets. For now, just imagine the city settling into night. The noise softens. The air cools. Candles flicker behind shuttered windows. Waste, disease, unseen dangers, all part of the background hum of a world that never quite understood what was making it sick. Hey guys, tonight we begin at the softest hour of the medieval day. The markets are closing. The shouting has faded. The pigs have wandered off to wherever medieval pigs wander off to. Lanterns are being lit, one by one, along narrow streets that twist like half-forgotten thoughts. So dim your lights. Let your breathing slow. Imagine the flicker of candlelight against stone walls. Tonight, we're walking through a city at night. A world of quiet footsteps, heavy doors, and kings who sleep uneasily beneath embroidered blankets. The sun has dipped below the rooftops of somewhere like Prague or Florence. The air cools quickly. Windows glow faintly with firelight. A watchman moves slowly down the lane, calling out the hour. His voice is steady. Reassuring, perhaps. Or perhaps slightly bored. Because it is the same announcement every night. Lantern light does not travel far. It pools gently on cobblestones, leaving corners in shadow. And in those corners, imagination does most of the work. There are no streetlights humming overhead. No distant traffic. Just the sound of a door bolting shut. A cough from an upper window. The faint scrape of someone dragging a stool across a wooden floor. Night in a medieval city carried a quiet kind of fear. Not dramatic. Just practical. Darkness meant vulnerability. Thieves preferred it. Illness lingered in it. Superstitions thrived in it. If something went wrong after sunset, help was slower to arrive. And yet, behind thicker walls and guarded gates, royalty experienced their own version of nighttime anxiety. Silk sheets do not cancel out dread. In fact, sometimes they amplify it. Let's begin with a king who knew something about uneasy nights, James I of England. James I, formerly James VI of Scotland, ascended to the English throne in 1603. He inherited not just a crown, but a complicated political landscape. He was intelligent, scholarly, fond of theological debate, also deeply suspicious. James had a lifelong fear of assassination, which, to be fair, was not entirely irrational in his line of work. But he took it very seriously. He worried about plots constantly. He surrounded himself with trusted favorites. He wrote extensively about kingship and divine right, as one does when feeling slightly defensive about one's position. At night, in palaces like Hampton Court Palace, guards stood watch. Candles flickered in long corridors. The king might lie awake, mind racing through imagined conspiracies. The famous gunpowder plot occurred during his reign. And though he survived, the awareness of how close danger could creep must have lingered. Outside the palace, London streets were darker, narrower. Watchmen carried lanterns and halberds. Citizens hurried home before curfew. A dog barked in the distance. Someone whispered a prayer before bed. Fear at night was not always about enemies. Sometimes it was about health, or the absence of heirs. Let's float gently to Spain again. The Habsburgs, loyal to their family tradition of strategic intermarriage, produced more than one fragile monarch. Philip IV of Spain, father of Charles II, ruled a vast empire. He also experienced profound personal losses. Philip married Elizabeth of France. They had several children. Many did not survive childhood. Infant mortality, even among royalty, was heartbreakingly common. Imagine the palace at night after the death of a royal child. Candles burning low. Courtiers whispering in subdued tones. A queen staring at a cradle that would not be needed again. Philip eventually remarried his own niece, Mariana of Austria. Because of course he did. The dynasty required it. From this union came Charles II. The continuation of the line. And, quietly, the continuation of genetic complications. Night magnifies grief. It stretches it out. In a palace chamber heavy with velvet drapes, a monarch might listen to the wind outside and wonder whether the family line would survive another generation. Let's drift north to Denmark and meet Christian VII of Denmark. Christian VII ruled in the late 18th century. He is often remembered for his severe mental instability. From a young age, he exhibited erratic behavior. Mood swings. Paranoia. Social withdrawal. He married Caroline Matilda of Great Britain. The marriage was deeply unhappy. Christian's mental health deteriorated further. He spent nights in strange routines. Talking to himself. Wandering palace corridors. Sometimes mocking courtiers. Sometimes retreating entirely. Caroline Matilda found companionship elsewhere, most notably with the royal physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee. That relationship would eventually shift the balance of power in Denmark. But we won't dwell on political drama. Instead, imagine the quiet tension in the palace at night. Doors closing softly. Footsteps echoing too loudly in marble halls. A queen staring into candlelight, aware that her husband's mind was drifting somewhere unreachable. Outside Copenhagen, lanterns flickered along the harbor. Fishermen tied up boats. Shopkeepers latched shutters. Ordinary families huddled close for warmth. Night equalizes people in subtle ways. Everyone, king or cobbler, must eventually close their eyes and face their own thoughts. Let's float over to France again. The Palace of Versailles glows at dusk. Hundreds of candles illuminate its mirrored halls. Courtiers move carefully through etiquette rituals that feel almost theatrical. And at the center of it all stands Louis XV of France. Louis XV became king as a child. He was adored early on. Nicknamed the Beloved. That affection faded over time. His reign saw wars, financial strain, and personal scandals. Louis developed a reputation for secretive romantic entanglements. He established the Parc aux Cerfs, a residence where young women were housed as his companions. It was discreet. Officially. But not invisible. At night, the king navigated corridors between private chambers. Behind the glamour lay loneliness. Distrust. The constant awareness that favor could shift like candlelight. Versailles after dark was strangely intimate. The massive palace quieted. Servants extinguished candles one by one. Tapestries absorbed sound. The king, surrounded by luxury, might still feel the weight of expectation pressing in. Let's gently step back to the streets. The watchman calls the hour again. All is well. He says it confidently. Whether or not it is true. There is quiet fear in medieval cities. Fear of fire. Wooden houses burn quickly. Fear of illness. A cough in the next room can signal weeks of uncertainty. Fear of unseen spirits. Superstitions flourish in darkness. And yet, there is also routine. A woman stirs embers for morning bread. A scholar finishes copying a manuscript by candlelight. A child dreams of something entirely unrelated to politics or plague. Meanwhile, in a distant castle chamber, a royal child lies awake under embroidered blankets. Perhaps sickly. Perhaps anxious. Perhaps simply aware that their life is not entirely their own. Let's drift to Russia once more and visit Alexei of Russia. Alexei, son of Nicholas II, was born in 1904 with hemophilia. A genetic condition passed down through European royal families, tracing back to Queen Victoria. Because of course European royalty was essentially one extended dinner party. Hemophilia meant that minor injuries could become life-threatening. The imperial family lived in constant, quiet vigilance. At night, if Alexei stumbled or bruised himself, anxiety rippled through the palace. Candles burned longer. Physicians were summoned. His mother, Empress Alexandra, grew deeply reliant on the mystic Rasputin, believing he could ease her son's suffering. The palace at night became a place of whispered prayers and fragile hope. Outside, in St. Petersburg, gas lamps flickered along wide avenues. Workers returned home. Snow fell softly. The empire felt stable. Until it wasn't. But we are not here for revolution. We are here for lantern light and quiet fear. Notice the pattern. Royals, wrapped in silk and ceremony, are often the most anxious people in the room. Their bloodlines are strategic experiments. Their marriages are treaties. Their children are political symbols. And when night falls, all of that pressure settles heavily. So let your breathing slow again. Imagine standing at the edge of a medieval square. The lanterns are dim now. The watchman's voice is distant. A final door closes. Somewhere behind stone walls, a king turns restlessly in his sleep. Somewhere in a narrow alley, a family curls together for warmth. The darkness holds them all equally. Tomorrow, we'll wander further into the strange and delicate lives of dynasties that tried very hard to outwit fate. Sometimes successfully. Often not. For now, rest in the quiet hum of the city at night. Lantern light. Soft footsteps. The steady rhythm of history breathing in the dark.